So I am now bringing back to the show this morning Gabriella Hoffman, contributor for Young Voices. She is a media strategist, and can I say she has become a friend to the show. I love our commentary. I love going back and forth with her on the issues, and she's also a fisherwoman, and I just absolutely am thankful for her friendship in Young Voices and their contribution to Common Sense America. So I invite you to join me as we welcome Gabriella Hoffman. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. I could do better looking at these results. I think most people share those same kind of concerns, but I'm happy to analyze what has transpired with you this morning.
Oh my goodness. How long did you stay up last night?
Earlier or late, not as late as I used to for
Yes.
previous elections, but I went to bed probably around 1 o'clock.
Oh wow. Okay. You have me
Yeah.
beat. I couldn't stay. I heard DeSantis' speech and then I finally crashed after that. And my husband actually stayed up a lot later than I did. And he was just kind of blown away by some of the results that were coming in.
Hmm.
And he is not very vocal when it comes to politics, but he was very vocal on some of the things we were saying. I have to first talk about my original home state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. What happened? What happened?
I think there's a few factors at play. I think maybe Republicans underestimated Democrats' popularity in that state. I've seen your Commonwealth, your home state, shift blue increasingly, and I think Republicans just don't grasp that reality. And I think their whatever slim majorities they have in the state legislature will probably dwindle very soon. We saw this in Michigan. Michigan lost control of their state legislature, which has been traditionally Republican, one or both chambers. And it's probably because Oz was not the best positioned candidate. I think if we would have had a Dave McCormack, or perhaps if Pat Toomey ran again, I
Yes.
think Pat Toomey would have run re-election, no problem. But he
Yeah.
decided to bow out. Probably he had his due. I
Mhm.
thought he was imperfect. I didn't agree with some of his gun legislation, but for economics and a few other issues, I did like Pat Toomey. He was
Yeah.
for worker freedom, protecting independent contracting,
Yeah.
for sober economic stuff, and largely that's where people fall.
Mhm.
But if we would have, I think, had a better candidate who didn't flip back and forth on his policies,
Mhm.
and then have Fetterman, who is very weak as a candidate, but I think certain Pennsylvanians said I'm more sympathetic to him. He's from Pennsylvania, and this you know, doctor,
Yeah.
TV doctor from New Jersey, because they were able to successfully frame their opponent. And I guess that's largely what happened. And like I said, I think politically, Pennsylvania is no longer a purple state. I think it is starting to become a reliably blue state.
Mhm.
So I think lots of different factors are at play. It's probably candidate choice. And perhaps Pennsylvanians, unfortunately, care more about things like abortion than they do the
Yeah.
economy. Because if we have Josh Shapiro now also winning the governor's mansion, I'm worried with him. I mean,
Yeah.
Tom Wolf was pretty far left, but this guy was very anti-Second Amendment.
Yes.
He broke
Mhm.
reciprocity with Virginia. I used to be able to have my concealed carry
Mhm.
applicable in Pennsylvania. Now that's not the case since he was able to challenge that. He said our laws were too lenient. And I worry that for wildlife conservation too, who is Shapiro going to be electing to the Game Commission? He's probably going to
Mhm.
stack it with a lot of anti-hunting interests, a lot of animal welfare advocates. So if you hunt and fish in Pennsylvania, I am very worried. If he defies odds and maybe puts in moderates, but I think even Pennsylvania's hunting culture could potentially change,
Mhm.
especially since he's so anti-gun.
Mhm.
I've heard he is pro-school choice. I'm not sure about that. I need to see more
Mhm.
proof if he's
Yeah.
going to govern as a moderate, but as an attorney general, he was really far to the left. So from the Senate to the governor's mansion, I am not hopeful of Pennsylvania, unfortunately. That's what I have to report.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I appreciate you bringing up the hunting and the fishing aspect because I know a lot of family members, extended family, that is very important to them. And that may
And
not be the
fracking.
case. Yes, yes,
What's
exactly.
going to happen with the industry there?
Yes. And I mean, I texted my parents at 5:30 this morning. I said, "You guys ready to move to Florida?" I said, because I know that there's a lot of people that vacated Pennsylvania and have moved to Florida. I said, "You guys ready? Because we will pack you up." I do not
Have them
want
move to
you.
North Carolina. You guys could use some reinforcements, or we could use some in Virginia too.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. That is not a bad idea, but we need to get them out of there. I'm honestly afraid more for this fact that the criminals are going to have more freedoms than those not. And, they are not too far from Philadelphia. They're about 45, 50 minutes from Philadelphia. They're in the farm country, but I'm starting to see more crime. And that is very concerning. And I don't want them to be in. I want them to feel safe. And I want to get them out of there. And the reason why I'm hounding this really hard is because I know my parents are watching, so they are going to get reinforcement from the both of us. But on that note, let's talk about New York. Let's talk about Michigan. But first, let's talk about New York and the gubernatorial. What are your thoughts on? I really was hopeful for Zeldin, but what are your baseline thoughts on how that went down? I mean, it really did. It is blue. It is blue.
That was a tough hill for Zeldin to climb. However, he improved upon previous Republican candidates. I think he only lost to Hochul, as the results are coming in now, by under 10%. So that's considered an improvement. But Zeldin may be able to help carry people across the line in congressional seats with his coattails. So we may see, even with him losing at the top of the statewide contest, we may see some coattail effects with Republicans flipping a few competitive seats in the New York Congress. Congressional delegation. So that's one silver lining. The voter advantage Democrats have in New York, unfortunately, is too much for Republicans to overcome. And I think, much like in the case of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, crime really has to get bad. I don't wish crime on anyone, but it really has to become just untenable for you to live in a place like Philadelphia or New York, for people to realize maybe we made a mistake in reelecting these people. Because Kathy Hochul, is she going to get rid of Alvin Bragg? I don't see that happening. Lee Zeldin was going to get rid of him. And we even heard the New York City mayor, who's really not much of an improvement on Bill de Blasio, he even was secretly rooting for Zeldin, saying that he can't really work with Kathy Hochul. And so I foresee people, status quo politicians, staying in, crime worsening in New York, and things not improving. Things are going to get more expensive in New York. They're going to raise taxes. They're going to impose many more burdens on the people there. And I think Zeldin can maybe try again if the attitude is there, but I don't know. It's just New York is so, it's been a blue state effectively for the last decade plus. And so it's just a very tough hill for Republicans to climb. But in Michigan, this is interesting because we had talked recently, that Whitmer was one of the worst offenders of COVID lockdowns. But I guess voters did not remember that. It was maybe too distant of a memory. Here in Virginia, like I said, we remembered Governor Youngkin didn't only win and flip Virginia because of education. That was a kind of late-breaking deciding issue because Terry McAuliffe shot himself in the foot with that comment, metaphorically speaking. But Virginians really did not like how far left our General Assembly, which is our state legislature, went. It was way too far left. We're a pretty moderate center-right Commonwealth here in Virginia, and I think even in spite of some losses we had here, we actually had a gain in the Virginia 2nd Congressional District, which I knew was going to go in our favor because Virginia Beach is the largest city in our Commonwealth. It's the most conservative city in the state, by all intents and purposes, home to the largest naval base in the world. And people there are pretty conservative, and they recognize that they elected the wrong person previously. Now they have Jen Kiggins, and it was disappointing in the two other races. But back to Michigan, Virginia, we were able to make COVID a referendum on Democrats because it was so close. So many businesses shuttered. We're a pretty pro-small business state in Virginia, and you even had Democrats and independents very concerned. But you can't just campaign on one issue. A referendum on COVID wasn't simply enough. That would have been great, but Whitmer was able to overcome a challenge, and maybe it's because Tudor Dixon. It wasn't perhaps that she was a terrible candidate. I think she could have won had maybe the primary not been so competitive. I'm not saying that you have to deprive people of choices, but when we have 10, 15, 20 people, and I'm exaggerating in the case of Michigan, but generally speaking, what I've seen, when you have and exhaust so many resources in the primary, it's going to create voter fatigue in the general.
Yes, it is.
And that divided a lot of people. Maybe some Republicans sat out. I'm not sure what to make the reading there, but I also think Michigan is effectively a Democratic state. Like I had alluded to earlier in our segment, the state legislature is now reliably blue. That's unheard of for the first time since the 1980s. So I don't know if the voters are comfortable. Like I said, I think it has to get worse before it gets better. Maybe the Republican wasn't the best person to stand up to Tudor Dixon, but we do see, congressionally speaking, some standout people won. John James finally won a seat to Congress. He's an impressive guy. He was a West Point graduate, really, really positive businessman, change maker, a really positive voice for conservatism. So there were little glimmers of hope on the congressional side too. And I think some races are still coming in or are pretty
Yes.
close as we're
Yes.
talking. But yeah, it's candidate quality. Maybe I think in Michigan, unfortunately, abortion turned out to be the top issue over economics. And maybe that'll change going into 2024 when people see maybe the economic conditions matter more than
Yeah.
abortion. So right now, it still hasn't seeped in because a lot of people were, I guess, convinced of believing that your rights to this, although it really wasn't a right, it was just a Supreme Court decision.
Yeah.
And the Dobbs decision handing down that decision just returned the issue to the states. And I don't think it's an issue of pro-lifers being too extreme, but I think we have to first start with just basic limits, a 12 or 15-week ban, and then you still have to win over people. And I say this as a very ardent pro-life person, but I think we haven't been able to convince people of what the Dobbs decision actually did. It just returned the issue to the states, its rightful place, and you can decide in that context where you can go. And Ohio overwhelmingly restricted abortion. Some states put abortion into effect even more solidly than previously. So we have to let the states decide there until we can change the culture. But I think changing the culture first, then gaining wins, or just changing perception there. So with Michigan, it's much like Pennsylvania, where I think it's no longer really a swing state unless proven otherwise for the foreseeable future.
Okay. And let's break down Georgia and Arizona. What are we going to see? Let's talk about Herschel Walker first. Let's talk about that race and what are we going to see? Are we going to know in a couple of weeks, or is this going to be, what's your analysis on that whole race?
Interestingly enough, it was, I hate to concede this, but I think some electoral prognosticators were correct that there would be some split ticket voting or absent voting. People may have nodded it down or rather checked it off for Kemp, but maybe left it blank for Herschel Walker. I have yet to see evidence or substantial evidence pointing to the split ticketing. Maybe the split ticketing will be shown in exit polling and analysis that comes out once we know the final outcome of that race. But Brian Kemp overperformed, of course. I think he was able to run on a great record. I've interviewed him before. He's a really standout guy. I did not like it when former President Trump attacked him ruthlessly for not changing the election outcome in Trump's favor. That was, it was not going to happen. And Kemp stood his ground. He passed electoral integrity reforms that led to more people voting. So I think even Democrats and independents liked what Kemp was doing, that he was able to ride the storm, even with criticism from the former president. He's pro-business, pro-Second Amendment. Georgia passed constitutional carry. People thought that would hurt Kemp. That did not hurt Kemp. He passed more pro-life protections. It worked there. It's just Georgia is still a red state. It is positioned to be a red state. And I think people may look to Kemp and say maybe he's a viable figure going forward nationally. Perhaps he could be a good senatorial candidate once he does his 4-year term. And he's a positive guy. He's not picking fights. And he's a very good, effective governor, much like Governor Ron DeSantis and some of the other people. Governor Kristi Noem won overwhelmingly. We have Governor Youngkin. We have Governor Abbott, who won a decisive third term. Beto O'Rourke. But when it comes to the Senate race, I'm not sure if it's because Herschel Walker is a weak candidate, but the fact that more people broke for Kemp over Herschel Walker raises some questions for me. So perhaps, like I said, maybe Kemp was more favored over Herschel Walker. It looks to be going off to a runoff. If he can starve off that challenge and win, I think now it's going to be, there was a third party candidate. I think it was maybe 3% of the vote taken away from that. I'm not sure if that's going to swing in Republicans' favor with the absence of that third party candidate, because it'll be Warnock and him. But I worry with a forthcoming potentially presidential bid announcement from former President Trump, I think that could hurt our chances. And I know maybe you disagree with me. Some of your watchers and viewers may disagree with me, but I'm seeing increasingly from a lot of Republicans, we could break down if you think Trump is the future, or if someone else should come in. But I think I'm worried about seeing a repeat in Georgia, where we see the oxygen sucked away from the candidates and more towards the former president. And we can't have that happening. We have to think about the greater movement in this case. And I hope the oxygen will be placed on Walker beating Warnock and not so much on the former president wanting to run again for office.
I'm in full agreement with you. And, my audience may agree to disagree, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, I woke up this morning and I said to my husband, I said, I love the fact that our country is looking for a leader. And when I
Mhm.
look into Ron DeSantis, I love the New York Post cover this morning, the future. And
Mhm.
a Goodwin wrote a phenomenal piece about Ron DeSantis early this morning. And his words were, we had conviction to guide us, we had the courage to lead us, and this is where woke comes to die. And that is a presidential leader. That I see a first family. I see a young John Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy with 3 young kids. And I think, Americans are looking for that.
Yes.
And as much as I loved serving at the pleasure of the president for President Trump, I respect him. I love his leadership. I love what he did during the administration. But I have to wonder, you didn't see Trump with DeSantis. DeSantis didn't need
No.
Trump. He didn't.
Did you see his attacks on DeSantis too? 2
I
attacks in the
did.
last week.
I
And
did.
I saw a lot of people who like both candidates saying, I'm going to pick DeSantis over Trump if it's a potential matchup.
Yeah.
And I think President Trump hasn't learned from losing in 2020
Mm-mm.
that you need to be a team player and it's not about you. And you can't bring down candidates because you weren't able to carry it over and win re-election. And I think people want younger candidates all across the board, right and left. You even see Democrats saying we need to have younger candidates. And I think Republicans are going to have that conversation as well, because we don't need septuagenarians and octogenarians running this country. Because what is it going to be, a matchup between a 78-year-old and an 82, 81-year-old?
Yes.
We can't, I don't think this country can survive that kind of matchup again.
Mm-mm.
And I think, like I said, I alluded to, there are many phenomenal leaders, governors, current and former.
Yes.
I think Kemp could be interesting, although I think he wants to be governor of Georgia. Youngkin down the road could be a great presidential candidate. I may be biased with that, and I also want him to stay governor for the full 4 years, because I think there's a lot of change to be had in the Commonwealth. You have Governor Abbott. You have even Mike Pompeo. I think Pompeo would be a dark horse. And actually, Pompeo came to DeSantis' defense when Trump launched that attack without naming the former president. But I think he was doing that maybe behind the scenes stuff. And I like Pompeo a lot. I think he can appeal to a lot of people and he can win the coalition, I think, if DeSantis decides not to run, because Pompeo doesn't have any positions that are holding him back. He's a free guy. He can easily prepare for a presidential campaign, and he could take the Trump successes without necessarily carrying the baggage, and he can be forward thinking. He's still fairly young, and he has the traditional conservative views all across the board. And I think even Democrats and moderates would like what he has to say because he comes off very presentable. There's so many people. Governor Kristi Noem in the future too. She's very pleasant, very relatable, was able to win decisively there. And I think we have a lot of great candidates in the future. Even congressional candidates who could become governors, who could then become presidential nominees. And we can't really hitch our wagon to one person. Even when Reagan was president, I don't think I wouldn't say it elevated to like a cult-like level, but I think people were able to take Reagan's gains, run with it, obviously no any imperfection, because nobody's perfect, of course, but Reagan was able to really make modern conservatism palatable. I'm not sure Trump is able to accomplish that because we're losing critical seats where we can have an influence, and you need to be able to govern to be able to have influence in this case. And so I think we're in good hands. And I think what President Trump's tenure showed us was that you can fight, but you need to be disciplined, because it's not about, appeasing white woke women who drink wine in the suburbs. I've talked to a lot of former Democrats who voted for my governor and said, I really like this kind of Republican. He's moderate. He appeals to me. I may not agree with everything he says, but he spoke to me and I like him and he has good character. And so it's not about changing our views whatsoever. It's about, we need to win over undecideds. I think there's huge opportunities. Also, where were Republicans offering a contrast? We saw some, alternative plan commitment to America that everyone would stick. We only just saw people saying we oppose Biden because, but we didn't have a positive agenda to contrast necessarily. This is what the election results are. Selfishly, I wanted more Republicans and a few of the same Democrats to campaign on protecting worker freedom, the right to independently contract, because where was that? Because Democrats are working behind the scenes through rulemaking processes to change your ability to do this. This affects everyone, not just Republicans, also independents and Democrats. And people love that freedom to be able to say, I want to file like this with the IRS. I am not an employee. I don't need to go through hoops to prove that I'm an employee. The economy is moving in this direction. As part of your discussion about economic issues, the fact that this was absent, and like I said, I'm selfishly wanting this issue to become more. And I think I've talked to Democrats and independents who said I would pull the lever for Republicans if they would talk about this issue more front and center. And you don't have to compromise your values. It's just talking about free enterprise and entrepreneurship and protecting true workers. We hear about this working class rhetoric. It almost sounds like Marxist. And I don't like Republicans talking like this because there's a difference between pro-worker and pro-labor. If we're going to try to be pro-labor, we're not making ourselves into a contrast to that of the left. And we're not going to win people if we don't have limited government, small government, low taxes, low spending. A lot of people want us to move away from that jargon. And I think that would be a terrible mistake. People still want to have those pocketbook issues front and center. Democrats and independents even like those issues too. So we hear this talk about realignment. I still think fusionism, where you bring in different camps together, still works. It worked in the state of Georgia. It worked in Virginia. It worked in Texas. And if you're going to embrace this so-called populist movement, that moves away from conservatism. It's going to be what? Economic progressivism and social conservatism, which calls for government to control facets and determine outcomes. That's not conservative whatsoever. It's not empowering in families or individuals. So this talk of redefining conservatism irks me a lot. And, blaming libertarians for one thing and this, and a lot of libertarians are disaffected conservatives and Republicans. I would caution anyone against trying to alienate them, and independents too. So I think it's a lot of assessing that's going to be happening. I want to hold out for Nevada flipping potentially to make up for the loss that we had in Pennsylvania. Numbers so far look okay as of our recording for Adam Laxalt to pull through, and we may flip that governor's mansion too. Arizona, I think you wanted to talk about Arizona.
Lake.
Arizona is interesting because numbers are starting to pour and it's slow counting. I don't know if that's really an indictment of the voter machines. I've heard Arizona is often difficult to gauge and it takes a while. Things should be, like I said, streamlined, of course, but the fact that they're still counting in-person voting raises some interesting eyeballs for me. But let's say in the event that both the Republicans lose, that could be an indictment of, relitigating 2020. That could hurt Republicans. I'm saying if they lose, and I still think even if they win, I don't think they should relitigate 2020. That could be it. Does the spirit of John McCain still hang over, especially with the governor's race? If Hobbs were to prevail over Lake, that remains to be seen. Arizona is a Republican state. Doug Ducey, like I said in our last conversation, really reddened that state after Democrat gains. And Trump scared him away from running for the U.S. Senate. So if Blake Masters loses, I will say that Doug Ducey was supposed to be put up for a vote for that. He would have won decisively, no problem. If Carrie Lake loses, I think Karen Robeson would have probably been better because she was also talking about, I didn't get a chance to interview Robeson Taylor, but she was talking about the water crisis. And Arizona has had that issue. That's a very important concern. It doesn't mean you have to, support crazy environmental policies, but you can address that with a market approach about why are we having this shortage of water and why is drought a problem? And so that's a big issue for Arizona. And school choice, of course, was still on the ballot. But if they win, like I said, they have to be careful about relitigating 2020. You need to move beyond the Twitter hot takes and govern seriously because voters, and I think also maybe if it goes in Democrats' favor, it's probably because the former Republicans, moderate Republicans could have flipped over to Democrats, or you have a lot of Californians who flipped Democrats. A lot is up in the air. If they do win, it would be very interesting. Trump will probably claim credit for both of them going across the line. But Arizona shouldn't be competitive. That's the state of Barry Goldwater. It's been reliably read for the most part. Sometimes the governor's mansion flips back and forth, but it's been reliably read with senators, with Congress people. Although I think in one congressional seat we have flipped, and I think another Republican seat may flip Democrat. I'm not sure, but we have made some gains there. I think they're going to maintain control of the state Senate and House of Representatives. I need to double check that. But I think if Republicans lose, it'll be because they were focused on the past and not so much on the future and trying to appease the former president. And like I said, with the country turning against Joe Biden, and with each state it differs. Like I said, with certain results, it favored Democrats, and other states it favored Republicans. North Carolina, your home state, was pretty good for Republicans for the most part. Ted Bunn Ted Budd rather defended the Republican seat. It was kept in Republican hands. A lot of congressional seats were largely kept. Some did not. I think there was the young gentleman who was gerrymandered a very good, reliable seat, and he lost 3 points in a Republican R+ seat.
Yes.
That raises some concerns for me. And I think overall the takeaway from this is that this could be for any candidate, any Republican going forward. You cannot replicate, let's say, Trump. You need to be your own person.
Exactly.
You can take away with trying to appeal to a cross-section of different voters. That's how Republicans have to win. But you need to be your own person. Like I said, those who are able to maintain independence from the president while still embracing his platform per se, Kemp, DeSantis, and others who are able to run away with electoral victories.
Yes.
They're carving out their own independent streak. And I really dislike the kind of lens of viewing everything from a Trump prism. I've been in politics now for a decade as a commentary person, as a commentary writer, speaker, journalist. I wear many media hats, so I can be a journalist, I can be, commentator, what have you. I've just noticed that people view things from a really kind of small lens. It shouldn't be viewed from a Trump prism. You need to look at the big picture, electoral trends, beyond that, because, electoral trends still work. This year, it probably will be not as bad of a year for a midterm referendum for Democrats. But it's people need to be their own candidates. You need to have fresh ideas. You need to not relitigate the past. You need to be able to tap into issues no one is discussing and make it an issue. Like I said, with this freelancer issue, we are losing out on that because, like I said, the economy is moving in that direction. It's a positive thing.
Yes.
That type of work option affords everyone, especially women who want to raise a family and maintain a career. You want to talk about pro-family policies? Freelancing is a pro-family policy.
Yes.
Because it affords women choices, because women don't have to choose and pick between family or career. We can do both and be happy and satisfied with doing both. Because
let me add that to that. Being a veteran spouse and being also a military spouse, that is huge. That is huge for them because earlier this year, I did interviews on the fact that there was such an underemployment of our military spouses and that they were giving businesses tax incentives to hire military spouses when these military spouses had great jobs working from home, but not being recognized anymore because COVID pandemic was over. Yes. So I mean, add that to your list because I do want to dig deeper into that with you. I think that is something that really needs to be brought to the forefront, and not enough people are talking about that.
I tried to make it an issue. I've interviewed a lot of candidates this cycle. Some knew about the issue. Some were like, it's not really my, concern right now. And I think I would happily make it an issue. With my work with Independent Women's Forum, we are front and center on this battle. We encourage, if your listeners are interested, doesn't matter where you live, because this is a federal rule. I encourage everyone to go to the Department of Labor website. If you want to make your voice heard, leave a comment and encourage your friends to leave a comment as well. We have an Independent Women's Network, one of our affiliates with IWF. We have a center where you can jot down your comment and give you all instructions. The first thing to do, irrespective of what happens with elections, we need to fight back this kind of regulatory fiat overreach that is coming from the Biden administration. This is how you can start to win and start to make this an issue, because like I said, it is tied to the economy. We can go on the offensive on this, and we can win undecideds, Democrats and centrists, on this issue, because a lot of people have felt very slighted by this administration. Hardcore Democrats have come to me and said, thank you for championing this as a conservative and for, listening to us, working with us, like forming coalitions that you would never be able to form whatsoever. Much like coalitions that have been garnered for education that we're starting to see built. This in the small business niche, we have huge opportunities to form coalitions and to win on this issue. And I hope more Republicans do make it an issue. They casually campaign on it, saying we're going to protect your right to work. But Tennessee actually enshrined the right to work in their state constitution overwhelmingly. I was very happy to see that. That was one silver lining, one glimmer of hope for me in my overview of or my examination into the election. Yes. So I think there's a lot to be said. This is not an end-all be-all for Republicans, but they're going to have to examine their closeness to the former president. It's a harsh reality. I'm sorry to say this. Yes. I think he started to become irrelevant after he lost in 2020. And for me, I was never really hitching my wagon to Trump. I'm an independent conservative. I wasn't anti-Trump, but I wasn't vociferously for him. And I think that's the approach you have to take, because candidates will disappoint you. Yes, I used to take that approach. I used to be gung-ho about Republicans, and I've learned that as a journalist and media person, I need to take a step back. I like people personally. I can analyze and say they're appealing here, but I'm not going to personally put out and give endorsements like I would perhaps previously before I matured and wanted to, be sober in my analysis. So even people who don't agree with me can look, okay, this is a convincing argument from the center right perspective, because I don't want to lose out on appealing to people we can sway. So I think it's not over. I think, like I said, we could still eke out a slim majority in the House and maybe, God willing, pull out, a 50-50 Senate, or perhaps a 51-49 majority. Either scenario, they keep saying Democrats could have a 51-49 scenario, or Republicans could, if the seats go in our favor, perhaps. But at worst case, it's going to be a 50-50 deadlocked with slight Republican leads in the House. So most legislation won't be able to get done. For the most part, remains to be seen. We never know. Some people may cave as well with that. But it's going to be gridlock, because this country, I think what we can digest from these results too, one of the final things I want to add is that this is a very divided country.
Yes.
And that's not sugar. I don't want to sugarcoat that, because this is true. We're in this age where we may not see red waves or even blue waves going forward. It may be a little blips on either side going forward because of just how polarized this country has become. Republicans need to recognize this. Democrats for sure need to recognize this as well, moderate their tone. And I think things could improve, but I want to be an eternal optimist. I'm not sure. But like I said, some reassessing does have to happen. We have a lot of exciting people who we could have leading the movement. And we need to have people who can be fusionist and not exclusionary, and welcome people while still maintaining your conservative principles. Keep those timeless principles of limited government, individual freedom, and all that there. That's worked before, and it can work again.
Yes, it can. On that note, Gabriella Hoffman, I love having you here at Common Sense America. You break it down and it is common sense. And so post-election night, wow, what a night. And I look forward to our audience continuing to follow you, bringing you back for more analysis. I do want to dig deeper on just that independent consulting piece, taking care of our veteran spouses, taking care of our military spouses in that space as well. I think that's very powerful. We need to talk more about that. And on that note, I'm so glad and thank you for coming this morning after being up all night following Election Central. We are grateful to Young Voices and your work as a media strategist. So thank you on this Wednesday. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Eden.